Begin, we have our audience here and most welcome Mr. Sinha to this discussion today. Welcome, Professor Chowdhry.
Okay, thank you, Arushi. So it's my great pleasure today to speak with Jayant Sinha. This is part of what we call the Global ISB Forum, TGIF. I try to invite one thought leader once a month in this forum to do a deep dive into some question of importance to us. We are going to have the next session on August 7th. That's going to be Professor Viral Acharya from NYU, who was the deputy director at RBI a year or so ago. So, Jayant, let me start by asking you a question. Have you ever been to ISB campus?
Yes, Professor Chowdhry, I've been to the ISB campus many times and have always very much enjoyed my time there, my interactions with students. And you'll be pleased to know that I have been both to the Mohali campus as well as the Gachibowli campus.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. So when the COVID is over, we would like to invite you again to meet the current batch. I think we'd very much like to see you in person. But given the situation, I'm delighted that you're here with us via Zoom. Let me start with a little bit of a background for Jayant. It's a very unusual background, I would say, somewhat unusual. Member of parliament, but not a typical member of parliament that you would think about. Many of my students watching this would relate to him that he has an MBA from another prestigious school on the East Coast of the United States. But also, Jayant has worked both in finance and he was McKinsey for more than a decade in IT and software. Jed also ran a hedge fund for a little while, a global special situations hedge fund. Was also a partner at Omedia. Incidentally, Omedia has a grant to us that I lead called the Digital Identity Research Initiative. Jayant was a Minister of State for Civil Aviation, and before that, a Minister of State for Finance. Currently, he's the chairperson of the Standing Committee for Finance at the Parliament. So let me start by asking you that question. What does the Standing Committee of Finance do?
So, Professor Chowdhry, let me tell you about the Standing Committee on Finance. It's one of the more visible and more influential standing committees. So Parliament, of course, as you know, has oversight of the government, oversight of the various institutions of government. And what Parliament has done is created 30 standing committees that collectively then have oversight of the different ministries that exist in the government. Now, as part of the Standing Committee, we have three very important functions that we perform. First and foremost, much of the legislation that is passed in Parliament is first vetted through the Parliamentary Standing Committee. And of course, we then provide our recommendations to government once the legislation comes to us. And then, those comments, those recommendations are considered by government. In many cases, they are accepted and the legislation is appropriately modified. So one is we have a very important role to play, which is to go through all the legislation that goes through Parliament. And of course, as you know, probably some 40 or 50% of the legislation in Parliament relates to financial matters, relates to the Ministry of Finance. So in that sense, our legislative workload in the Standing Committee on Finance is quite high. So that's one very important function. The second very important function that we fulfill is to scrutinize the budgets that are presented by the various ministries. So in our case, the ministries that we are responsible for are the Ministry of Finance, which includes corporate affairs and disinvestment, of course. But it's also the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, MOSPI as it's called, which is all the economic data, which is performance evaluation of different government schemes and so on. And then of course Niti Aayog as well. So we are responsible for scrutinizing the budgetary allocations for these different ministries, and we spend a lot of time during the budget session of Parliament going through the budget allocations for these different ministries and then providing our recommendations as well. The third very important function that we play is that we are the eyes and ears of Parliament, if you will, on many of the important issues related to the Ministry of Finance. And so we often take up matters. So for example, we are dealing with issues related to funding the alternative assets industry right now. We are looking at issues related to funding agriculture, the function of the insolvency and bankruptcy code. These are all issues that have come before us because people have sent various representations to us, and we have to take them on board. Once we go through and do our meetings, then we present a report to the government, and then the government comes back to us formally with their action taken on our recommendations on each of these different topics. I will also add that many important regulatory institutions are statutory bodies. So for example, the Reserve Bank of India is a statutory body that has been established by Parliament. And as such, the Insurance Regulatory Development Authority, the Reserve Bank of India, Securities and Exchange Board of India, these are all statutory bodies whose, in a way, oversight is through Parliament, not necessarily through the ministry. Of course, the ministry plays a very key role and a very vital role for these regulatory institutions. But as a parliamentary committee representing Parliament, we are also responsible for the functioning and the oversight of these all-important regulatory bodies for the financial sector: Reserve Bank of India, Securities and Exchange Board of India, PFRDA, which is the pension regulator, the insurance regulator, and the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board. So these are all very important functions that we have, as I said. Number one, legislation. Number two, budgetary allocation. Number three, important issues of public interest that go through the standing committee. And then number four, oversight and guidance of these very important statutory bodies that are within the purview of the Ministry of Finance. We have a very distinguished standing committee that today, of course, includes the Honorable former Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, who of course has extraordinary experience when it comes to the financial sector, having been a former Reserve Bank of India governor, former Vice Chairman of the Planning Commission, former Finance Minister, and of course, Prime Minister for 10 years. So Dr. Manmohan Singh is a member, Shri Manish Tiwari ji, Srimati Ambika Soni ji, are some of the other important Congress members, Shri Praful Patel ji, Shri Amar Patnaik ji, Shri Pinaki Mishra ji. These are some of the important members from the opposition. And then of course, we have a number of members from the BJP as well. So this is the constitution and the work of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance. It's a very, very important responsibility. For me particularly, I'm one of the younger chairs of this Parliamentary Standing Committee. Typically, it's been former finance ministers or former senior cabinet ministers who've been chairs of the Standing Committee. So it's a very important responsibility, a very major privilege for me to be in this role. And I am learning and gaining tremendous experience and knowledge on all of these issues in much more detail through the work that the committee is doing. And I'm very, very honored and privileged to have on the committee very distinguished members who play a very important role in the work of the committee. The work of the committee is completely confidential. Our reports are always made representing the views of the committee. They're usually made on a consensus basis. And so it becomes a very vital and important input to government as well.
Thank you. That was very, very helpful. I was, and I think many of us listening to you are very delighted that it's not on party lines. It's a committee that has people from both parties, and there are many experts on this committee as well. The other heartening thing to know was that the stuff you do is confidential, which means you're not worried about how it's going to look to the press, because we only read newspapers, and from newspapers, you don't always get what's going on behind the scenes. Would you say that what you guys do is a bit more impartial in some sense?
We very much address the issues, Professor Chowdhry. Depending on what the concerns are that members have, that the general public have, we do bring that up in front of both industry representatives, various leaders of these regulatory institutions like the Reserve Bank of India governor, and of course officials that come from the various ministries. So we routinely have secretaries to the Government of India presenting to the committee and bringing their views, their considerations on legislation, on policy matters. And we have a very frank and open and very meaningful discussion on these topics. As I said, they are in camera, they are confidential. And so we really are able to address the key issues. And of course, having very experienced, very knowledgeable, very distinguished members asking questions of officials means that the quality of the discussions in the committee is of a very, very high order and leads to very substantial changes and modifications to both policies as well as to legislation.
Okay, that's fantastic. So one thing I want to tell many of my viewers, many of them are students, some of them are faculty, are that if you have an idea that you think makes sense, Jayant told me in the last meeting that he reads the newspapers and he reads the op-eds, and that's where he knows what the public is thinking. So that's one mechanism by which you can reach him, and he will be able to incorporate some of those ideas if they make sense. Jayant is also, I know that you're also very active on social media. I remember when you were the Minister of State of Civil Aviation, people used to write about their complaints and you would respond on Twitter. I think that was very unusual. Once in a while, I think you scan your Twitter thing, and if people have some ideas, you do respond to them. Is that a fair statement?
No, that's a very fair statement, and not just social media. I mean, of course, I have always been active on social media and addressed people's issues and complaints, whether they were related to my responsibilities then or are related to my constituency. Of course, I respond to everything as quickly as I can. But it's not just social media or the newspapers. If people write to me via email, or they call me, or send me a WhatsApp message, or whatever, I try to be as responsive as possible. And all good ideas are heard, all good issues are considered. Of course, I always request everyone to apply their mind before they shoot off emails or write what they do. In most cases, we are quite conversant with the issues. We understand the matter at hand. So please, whatever your thoughts are, your representations are, spend some time, apply your mind. Think of it as if you're writing an important term paper that's going to result in an important grade. Do the work beforehand so that we can benefit from your knowledge and your insight on these matters. Don't just dash it off.
You mentioned email, so is your email public?
Of course it is. My email and my phone number are entirely public. If anyone is interested, I can give it to you right now. It's jsinha21@gmail.com. jsinha21@gmail.com, and my phone number is 9811716444. I am on social media. I am on WhatsApp. You can send me whatever your thoughts are. However, it's the quality of your thinking, the quality of your
absolutely,
that'll result in action or not action. So please do put some preparation into it.
I'm so impressed with the openness with which you're willing to engage with general public. So thank you for both. Thank you for this. I knew your email, even I didn't know your phone number, now I do. Okay, so today's talk is about how are we going to get India back to growth again? And rather than just speculate on numbers and, put things out of the air, I would like to put a little framework on it. And for this framework, I want to go to 2 articles that you wrote, which I think are very apt for the discussion today. The first one was an article you wrote in McKinsey Quarterly about the paradox of fast-growing companies, tigers. And you made some really startling comments there about increasing returns and how the virtuous cycle of feedback needs to be there before we can grow. I think we can apply that idea to the country as well. Is that not right?
No, you're
I
absolutely
hope you remember, this was written many years ago.
Yeah, I'm stunned, Professor Chowdhry, that you dug out that article. That article was written, I think, in 1995 in the McKinsey Quarterly.
96, yeah, that's correct, yeah. I thought it was very, very insightful.
Well, it has become a classic. It drove a lot of our work at McKinsey for a decade thereafter. That led to our work with Professor Brian Arthur, who you might know was really the person, the very out-of-the-box iconoclastic economist who really got the whole, sort of economic world thinking about increasing returns. Because as you know, what is taught in textbooks is competition results in diminishing returns and then an equilibrium situation in a market economy where there is no more value to an investment. Therefore, competition leads to these kinds of outcomes. What we are seeing then, and of course, this was pre-internet. This came a work I had done in the technology sector.
And to be fair, Paul Romer also has very influential work on increasing returns.
Yeah, of course, he's won a Nobel Prize for his work on knowledge spillovers and positive externalities and increasing returns. So yes, our thinking was informed by what Professor Romer had been saying, what Professor Brian Arthur had been saying, and the actual client work that we were doing at that point in technology. We found thereafter, and of course, the $1.5 trillion market cap of Microsoft, the $1 trillion market cap of Google, $800 billion market cap of Facebook, all of that have proven that what's driving the economy right now is not diminishing returns, which is the old neoclassical view about microeconomics. It's an entirely new way of thinking about microeconomics, which is the world of increasing returns and platform-based businesses. And the whole discussion of Industry 4.0, the discussion around artificial intelligence, machine learning, it's all predicated on a different worldview in economics, which is a worldview based not on diminishing returns, but on increasing returns. And that basically means more investment leads to more competitive advantage, which leads to more market power and eventually monopolistic outcomes and $1 trillion market caps. So,
but this requires a feedback loop in which all the pieces need to be there. Exactly. So I think when we take this idea from a company to a country, a lot of issues related to infrastructure, things, institutions that will make that happen, those need to be filled in. So let's take this idea of yours and apply it to a country and see what we need to do. Because after all, if we are going to go back to the growth rates that we used to talk about before COVID, 8%, 9%, 10%, it's not going to come from the standard model. I think it is going to come from some notion of this fixing all the loops in the feedback loops to reach that level. Could you say something about that?
No, thank you, Professor Chowdhry. You're, of course, touching on the right set of issues. And you will see in the economic survey also that both Subramaniam as well as Sanyal, the chief economic advisor and the principal economic advisor, are also votaries, also supporters of systems dynamics and non-linear thinking, of course, as well. And I've had many discussions with both of them. And at a very, very basic level, this is what's laid out in the economic survey, which is the virtuous cycle of more investment leading to more growth, leading to more jobs, which then leads to more investment. And that is a very simple feedback loop right there, positive feedback loop that can drive growth and can be a virtuous growth cycle for the Indian economy as well. So it's all about unlocking investment and making sure that investment is flowing into the economy, which then drives growth, jobs, and more investment thereafter.
So I want to push you a little. All that is good, makes sense theoretically, but I want to know, what are you doing in the current government? Where are the holes that we are trying to fix to make these feedback loops going? So give us a little bit more specifics.
So let's get very specific, Professor Chowdhry.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here in Demo Tand in Hazaribagh, which is my home here in Hazaribagh. And one of the major issues that we are dealing with right now in Jharkhand and in Hazaribagh is around commercial coal mining. And here is an example of how the government is working in a particular sector to drive investment and to drive a virtuous cycle of growth and job creation. So what we've done, and this is a tectonic shift, for example, when it comes to coal and when it comes to the mining sector, is that in the past, this has been largely nationalized. Mrs. Gandhi nationalized it in 1971 and created Coal India, and all of the coal production in India, by and large, particularly that which was going into the market and being sold, was happening through Coal India. And Coal India had a complete grip on all the investment, all of the coal production that was happening in India. Now, what the government has just done is massively open up the coal sector. 41 coal mines are to be privatized. They are going to be, through a transparent auction process, be bid out to the private sector. And we expect about 33,000 crores of capital expenditure of investment to flow into coal mining. This will enable us to substitute the coal that we are currently importing. Coal is our third largest import. $23 billion, 1.7 lakh crores of coal is currently being imported in India from Indonesia, from South Africa, from Russia, and Australia. So if we open up the coal sector, we get 33,000 crores of capex going into it. We have 35 to 40,000 crores of coal revenues that get generated, which leads to about 3 lakh jobs that get created. And of course, then this results in more induced employment generation and so on and so forth. So here is an example where the government, recognizing the virtuous cycle that is unlocked, the positive feedback that is unlocked from investment, has thrown open the commercial coal mining sector so that we get private sector players to come in and private sector players to invest and create jobs and generate revenues for themselves and revenues for the treasury as well. So this is a perfect example of where the government has really taken very bold, very dramatic steps to open up a sector. Similarly, agriculture, similarly, space, similarly, defense production. In each of these different areas, we are opening up sectors of the economy in a way that has never been done before, and which is extraordinary and really, really, I think, going to unlock and unleash massive investments from the private sector.
Okay, so this is very helpful. The specificity was very helpful. I want to relate it to another article you wrote, which is, I think we are referring to, which was written in the HPR, called Strategies That Fit Emerging Markets. And you mentioned in that article, which is very pertinent here, that in many developing countries, the role of intermediaries that connect one thing to the other is often missing. And strategies that successful multinationals employ is to actually arbitrage that, take advantage of that. At the country level, we should be thinking about fixing those holes, which is also part of your article. My question to you is, with all this brain power going in, why is it not happening fast enough?
It's happening. It's absolutely happening.
Okay.
Let's take coal again. In coal,
also I got coal, I got agriculture, and I think all of those are great initiatives. But BJP got a pretty big mandate in 2016. And by the time 2020 was rolling around, we were heading back to growth rates of 5.25%. Tell us, what are the difficulties? What are the roadblocks that are not allowing us to reach that 8 or 9 or 10% that we were hoping we would get on a continuous basis to reach the 5 trillion mark that our Prime Minister talked about?
So just before the corona pandemic hit us, the economy was picking up momentum. All the high frequency indicators were trending very positive. Growth was actually looking quite good. And you can go back and you can read that in February or early March of 2020 as to what the momentum was in the economy. Of course, with the pandemic, it was necessary for us to have the lockdown, and that has resulted in some at least 60 to 90 days of diminished economic activity,
Yeah,
which
understand. Yeah.
is going to weigh on GDP growth and so on. So I would suggest that you go back and look at January, February, which will give you a good sense of how momentum had been picking up with a number of the reform steps that the government had already undertaken, cutting corporate taxes, providing
Okay,
more.
I'm not going to let you get away with this. Okay, all right, got it. January and February. I really want to understand. This is not a criticism. This is really an understanding, because when I teach, I always tell my students, we often learn from why things don't work as much as why they work. So I'm saying by the end of 2020, if you look at 2019, there was a slowdown. Okay, this definitely was a slowdown, which started to pick up, as you said. But do you have some insights on what caused that slowdown? Because we thought we would just continue, and even the CEA admitted that the growth rates weren't as high. What is stopping these wheels functioning? What happened? I mean, if you understand that, maybe next time we will do a better job.
So, Professor Chowdhry, I'm sorry to contradict you, but I think the situation was that towards the last quarter of 2019, which is Q4 of 2019, and then the first quarter calendar, that is not financial, of 2020, which is January, February, March, the economy was picking up momentum. The economy was starting to grow much faster. That was certainly happening, and you, as I said, can see it in the high frequency indicators. However, that being said, that would have still resulted in growth at 6-7%, probably GDP growth of 6-7% in real terms. What we really need in India is growth of 8 or 10%. That really is our aspiration. That's really what we are working towards for the $5 trillion number and so on. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is what's inhibiting growth at the 8% level? That really is, I think, the important question to ask.
Yeah.
And my suggestion is that we look at two areas where I think we've had some challenges. One, of course, has been the external sector, where globally trade was slowing, globally exports had been soft, and so on. And that, of course, was a challenge for us to be able to grow faster in that regard. And then the second thing that we have to worry about is really, the overhang of the financial sector. We need India's financial sector to be even more robust. We need credit to flow more quickly to all kinds of players, big, small, micro, in the economy. We have to get past our NPA problem, which of course we are still working through. And we have to have very competitive, very high quality financial institutions that can fund our growth. And this is where I think we need to be able to do more. We need to have more risk capital available for our entrepreneurs. I think that's part of the reason why we're doing this study on alternative assets right now in our standing committee, because we need more risk capital, more equity capital that's available in India for our entrepreneurs, so that can actually drive growth, drive investment, and so on. So I think whether we look at the external sector or we look at the strength of the financial sector, both of those have to be made much better, much more robust for us to be able to drive growth at the 8 or 10% level. And I think that's where the Honorable Finance Minister, the Honorable Prime Minister have also been putting a lot of emphasis on India's competitiveness and India's financial sector to strengthen them as much as possible so that our economy can really get to the 8 to 10% growth that we actually need.
Okay, excellent. Speaking of external sector, we got a little bit of good news in terms of the falling oil prices, because we are big consumers of oil. And when we met the finance minister, we suggested that this is a good time when the prices were down to $20 a barrel. We thought it was a good time to actually buy forward contracts and in fact buy some oil reserves. I don't know if your company has discussed that issue to lock in these low prices.
No, we haven't examined that, Professor Chowdhry, but that is certainly something that I'm sure the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas are examining very seriously, because obviously if we can lock in long-term oil contracts at low prices, that will be very beneficial for India, and also obviously fill up our strategic petroleum reserve as well.
Okay. I think there are a number of questions. Arushi, are we able to take questions? So I'll go to questions and then come back if I need to.
Yes, of course, sir, there are
Yeah,
questions.
so let's pick somebody and let them ask a question. Please make sure your question is really a question, not a statement. There are other forums for making statements. Make sure it ends in a question mark and make it quick. And please don't say, thank you, Dr. Sinha, thank you. Save the thank yous. I'll thank him profusely at the end. Go straight to the question.
Professor, actually, this is a webinar format, so it won't be possible for participants to speak. However, they are sending us questions on the chat box, on the Q&A section, and we can pick up questions.
Can you read it?
So the first one, Avnish Rathi, he says, what is the government's longer-term view of telecommunication industry?
Telecommunications is obviously a vitally important industry for our growth and our development. The government, of course, has been very deeply engaged in the rollout of 4G and now 5G as well. And we want to make sure that our industry is strong, that it is able to invest, that it is very competitive, and that our consumers continue to get the high quality, very affordable telecom services that we're getting. Telecom, in fact, has genuinely been a revolution for this country. Again, I'm here in Hazaribagh, and I have excellent, I would say, internet coverage here, which is being provided by our telecom companies. You're seeing me live on this webinar through the services provided by telecom companies, and therefore this is a hugely important and hugely vital sector for us.
Okay, I'll read out the second question, Arushi. There's a question from Ayush Shirotia. The question is, why were we not able to tap into the opportunities that were open because of the trade situation going on with China? A lot of companies are pulling out of China. If we were ready, we would have taken advantage of it. And Ayush goes on to say that countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh made the most of that, but we weren't ready. First of all, is it true that we weren't ready? And if not, what do we plan to do differently to capture the market that is being vacated by pull out from China?
We are ready and we are capturing the market. I mean, if you look at different sectors, for example, mobile electronics, if you look at consumer electronics, textiles, you'll see that we are in active discussions, and we have even ramped up in some cases significant investments from multinationals that are looking to diversify their supply chains. Of course, many policy steps have been taken with respect to increasing our competitiveness further, making it possible for companies to relocate and establish their operations in India, both by our large domestic market as well as the policies we've now put in place to be able to make India into a production platform for the world.
Okay, Arushi, you get to pick the next question.
Yeah, so we have Rivoli Sinha, who says that the current government has set an ambitious target of $5 trillion by 2024, and we continue to highlight the growth on total GDP year after year and India's ranking. Yet the per capita income stands at only $2,000. What are the so we are way below the comparative economies, including many small Asian countries. What's wrong with the approach, and what can be done to improve the situation?
Well, as far as that question is concerned, we could spend the next few years debating what India's development model should be to increase per capita GDP. Difficult to answer that question in a very summary fashion. But what I will point you towards, Rivoli, is that you should read an article and a report that I've written called Getting to the Green Frontier, where I have laid out a development model for India that will enable us to accelerate our growth, accelerate per capita GDP growth as well. And that really is based on ensuring that India's growth is both focused on competitiveness as well as sustainability. And now we should add resilience as well, the ability to recover from shocks like the coronavirus pandemic. But these are the areas that we need to concentrate on: competitiveness for today, so that we can compete globally; sustainability, so that we can maintain, our competitiveness in the long run; sustainability in the broader sense, in the SDG sense, the UN Sustainable Development Goals; and then, of course, resilience to be able to deal with shocks. So, for us to really how to do that is in this article that I have written, and in the many articles I've written over the last few years. But let me just conclude this point by saying that what is crucially and vitally important is that India's companies become more productive. They become totally world-class, globally competitive, because it's only India's enterprises, large, medium, small, that can drive India's growth and take India forward. That there is no doubt about that. Government has a very important role to play as a facilitator, but it is ultimately you all, as those members of our society, that will unleash innovation and drive India's growth. So it has to come from the private sector. There is no other way. So guys, it's in your hands.
Okay, guys, it's in your hand. It has to come from the private sector, and you cannot just complain. You have to do something about it. Okay, here's a question about from Nitin Kumar, who is an ISB alum. No, he is a current ISB student. His question is about the parliamentary committees' deliberations being confidential in nature. And he says in the US, many of these things is open and it's even broadcast live. Why are we doing it in a closed door? I mean, I know the answer, I think so, but maybe you can say why confidentiality is helpful or hurtful.
No, this has been discussed when the thinking installations are fair, open, and bipartisan, that it's better to keep them confidential. If we were to make all of them public, then we would have more politics and less consideration of the important matters. So this is what ensures that they're in a bipartisan way and that we address the issues. Now, that being said, some people have proposed that perhaps some of the committee deliberations, a subset of them, be public. And that is something that has been brought to the attention of the Honorable Speaker and the Honorable Vice President. And they are, of course, thinking about this as well.
And is there a possibility of seeing this after the fact? So, many classified documents get unclassified after a period, just so that the students can learn from this after the fact, if not in time.
Well, many of the issues and matters are then discussed and debated in the media as well. So I think the issues get a fairly thorough hearing publicly through the media and through various other formats like this webinar that we're doing. So I think the issue is not about politicians wanting to speak about these matters, because politicians are known for being long-winded and loving the sound of their voice. Frankly, I don't think the public cares. I don't think the public is genuinely too interested in policy matters. I find very, very limited interest in key policy issues in the public in general. And the very fact that we are asking right now about the role of parliamentary committees right now tells me that most students, most faculty perhaps as well, are not particularly interested in the inner workings and in the day-to-day operations of parliamentary democracy. Most people, rightfully so, I would say, are much more interested in making sure that it's working overall and the results are happening, which is absolutely fair. But at the same time, particularly for very knowledgeable and engaged citizens like ISB alums and ISB alum students, I think it's very, very important for all of you to engage deeply, not just in the outcomes, but also in the workings of parliamentary democracy. Because if the internal mechanisms are not working well, then the results obviously will not be there also. So my fervent plea to all of you, just excuse me 1 second, I'm getting an urgent call. My fervent plea to all of you would be that you do. हाँ शर्मा जी, मैं एक वेबिनार में हूँ, कुछ जरूरी बात? Sorry
Thank
about
you.
that.
These are no. I hope all the watchers feel a little privileged that you are able to take time from your busy schedule. So I think the idea, what you suggested for us to be involved, is very, very relevant. And here ISB would like to engage with you. How about I'm going to make a deal with you? How about if we do a quick radio show with you once a month for 15 minutes, where you tell us about the inner workings and some insights. I mean, we would love to do that. Okay, so I'll come back with the proposal.
No, Professor Chowdhry, I'd be very happy to do that. And today it's a world of podcasts. So if you want to do a podcast
Yes.
and we can do it once a month for 15 minutes, very easy to do it, and make the podcast available so then people can listen to it at their convenience as well. And
Okay,
perhaps
that's
ISB as an institution can start a podcast series where, not just with me, of course, but with other also experts or policymakers.
yeah.
You can do a discussion and a dialogue and put it out there. I have participated in several of these podcasts with institutions around the world, and I think that they are quite valuable.
I think that's a great idea. Thank you for that offer. We'll start with you, and that will perhaps encourage others to be not as reticent and shy. Here's another question from Yaman Arora. He's worried about the sovereign ratings downgrade that recently happened. He wants to know, are we going to do anything about it? Does it really matter? Is it related to NPA situations or?
Well, as far as the sovereign ratings are concerned, India's view has always been that our overall macro situation is very stable and very creditworthy. And of course, we will continue to follow those policies that ensure our macroeconomic stability and our sovereignty in the sense of independence and our ability to chart and manage our own destiny. So we will certainly follow those policies and that philosophy. And of course, we recognize the credit rating agencies have to do what they have to do, and they, of course, will do that. But India has always been very, very creditworthy, and India has always eschewed and stayed away from any macroeconomic misadventures, and we have a very, very robust and very stable macroeconomic situation right now.
Yeah. In fact, one of our colleagues, Shashwat Alok, wrote an op-ed piece in which he noticed that there was a downgrade, but the markets didn't react at all. So there was really no news in that. And his view was that, in fact, these rating downgrades have no news content. So you may want to read that thing as well. Here's a question about dependence on China. This is a question from Abhishek Kala. He's saying, is there a plan to reduce the strategic dependence on China? And does it have any implications for domestic entrepreneurs?
So the Honorable Prime Minister has laid out, I think, a very compelling vision of Atmanirbharta, which really has to be understood in the sense of being able to chart our own destiny, control our future. And that really means that India has to become very, very competitive. India has to be able to be very well integrated in global supply chains and be, an important and a very substantial production platform for the world. So that is the policy that we are following. It's a policy that's intended to make India an economic superpower, an economic force to reckon with. It's not directed against any particular country or any particular issue, but it is really about India's future and India's strategic independence, strategic autonomy in the long run. That's really our vision.
Okay, but we are not going back to the issue of raising tariffs or barriers like that. The focus is on competitiveness rather than protection. So is that?
The Honorable Prime Minister has been very clear and said on multiple occasions that we have to be both local and global. So they're two sides of the same coin. And so if we want to produce world-class products and services for our consumers here, let's do that locally. Let's make sure that we are super competitive. And if we do that locally, then globally also, we will be able to export. We will become part of important global supply chains. So the two are inextricably interwoven. They're two sides of the same coin, both local and global. But what pulls it all together is this notion of competitiveness, this notion that our companies and our production systems are as competitive as possible, that they can match those anywhere around the world. And of course, as I said, it's competitiveness, sustainability, and resilience that really will enable us to control our destiny going forward.
But not tariffs or duties. Are you denouncing those?
There are various policy instruments that are used to strengthen competitiveness and ensure that our companies are able to produce and manufacture at very competitive rates for everybody, both domestic as well as global consumers. And there are a range of policy instruments that are used to be able to do that. Those tariffs, of course, are one of them as well.
Okay. Here's a question from Abhishek Reddy. This question relates to cryptocurrency, digital currency. I know that the Prime Minister and Niti Aayog has embraced blockchain as a technology for many, many different applications, such as supply chain and records and so on and so forth. But India has been rather cagey, rather distant about cryptocurrency and digital currency. Is that view a firm view, or do you think this is still open to a discussion?
Like countries around the world, Professor Chowdhry, the Indian government is also examining both blockchain as well as related technologies quite closely. The RBI, of course, is doing that as well. And it is part of what Niti Aayog is also examining. And so let us see what necessary policy initiatives are required. We recognize that blockchain is a very foundational and important technology. And we will have to see when is the right time to put in place appropriate regulations and institutional structures around this. So it is under consideration.
Okay. Here is a question from Akanksha Gupta about the aviation industry. I know you were the Minister of State for several years for this. Given the COVID crisis, the aviation industry is in deep trouble. Does the government have a plan to save the aviation industry, or is there any plan to look at that issue at all? I know that Air India, of course, will be privatized, which is long due and is probably a good idea, but the industry in general, especially the private players.
So India has a very successful and a highly competitive aviation sector. And the government has taken very important steps to make this even more competitive and to throw it further open. So, of course, as you correctly pointed out, that there is a strategic disinvestment of Air India happening forward under, again, very, very liberal guidelines. We are privatizing our airports. We are opening up the MRO sector. We are providing all necessary support to our airlines as well. And as we move into a very rapid recovery post the corona lockdown, we think that our airlines will once again be able to, gain significant revenues and once again be able to grow very, very quickly.
Okay. We are almost getting to the end of it. I want to ask you a couple of questions which are sort of more personal in nature, but you can answer or not. One is not as personal, and in fact, this is a question that somebody asked, which is, how does your work as an MBA, and many people might know that you also went to IIT Delhi, and then you also have an MSc from UPenn in energy. So your work is very wide, both in finance, energy, engineering. How has that helped you being a parliamentarian? And can we encourage more people to take that route that you took, which is very, very unusual?
Well, thank you for that, Professor Chowdhry. You know, we have many very accomplished professionals in Parliament who all contribute their professional expertise, whether it is as physicians, whether it is as business people, as lawyers, diplomats. There are many very accomplished parliamentarians, and of course, the country benefits greatly from their expertise. In my particular case, the work I've done over the years, both as a management consultant and as an investor, I find to be of great help, particularly when it comes to policy matters in terms of hard analytics, being data-driven, fact-based, evidence-driven, being able to formulate policy alternatives, then evaluate the different policy alternatives in terms of both their quantitative as well as their qualitative impact, and then apply appropriate decision-making criteria, obviously under uncertainty, to come up with what is a robust plan to move forward on. And of course, thereafter, you really have to monitor execution, make sure that everybody who's doing their job has the resources to deliver, and that we are monitoring outcomes. So the entire sort of a chain that you have to undertake as an executive in terms of ensuring strategy formulation, execution, outcomes monitoring, you have to do that in policy making as well. And so those skills transfer over quite nicely.
Okay. Now, you came from a family where politics was discussed on dinner table, probably. Your father was a finance minister and the external affairs minister. And you two belong to two different parties. So what's the dinner conversation like when you meet him?
We have made it a policy that we never discuss politics or religion at home. We have lots to discuss, grandchildren, people's plans,
Okay.
What's happening in sports, what's happening in music, what's happening in art and culture. All of us are writers as well, so we discuss our books and our
wonderful.
often. So we make it a point that we don't have any politics on the table.
Okay, no politics at all. Okay, and I know that your wife is also in the finance industry. She's still with Blackstone, is that correct or no?
Can you all hear me?
Your wife was also in the finance industry, a professional in finance industry. Is that right or not?
Sorry, Professor Chowdhry, I lost you there for the first part. Can you just repeat your question?
I was saying that I read somewhere that your wife, Punita, is also a professional and in the finance industry. So do you guys discuss work at home?
No, certainly we do discuss a lot of issues related to the financial sector. I'm very fortunate that I was able to marry one of the few women in my IIT class. And so We've not
Oh,
been
you were one of the lucky ones. Okay, all right.
was one of the lucky ones. So now we've been married 34 years. So it's been obviously a long time. But she, of course, is the educated one in the family. She has a PhD in finance from Wharton. So, of course,
Right.
I benefit a great deal from her insight and wisdom when it comes to the financial sector.
Okay, I'm sure that my wife who's watching this would be very glad to hear what you just said. We are almost out of time. I'm just going to ask you one last question, which I just saw on this thing. And I know about 2 years ago, I attended a session of yours with Tarun Khanna in New Delhi, where we talked about entrepreneurship. His question is, what steps is the government thinking of taking to make a high-risk capital available to young students and techies who have deep tech startups so that they can get to this increasing returns that you talked about in your article?
Well, I think the government's already taken a number of very important steps, including in terms of ease of doing business, the India Aspiration Fund of funds that's been created. But government's a very small part of the story. The reality, I will say, as a venture capitalist, and I ran a media network in India for 4 years and invested hundreds of millions of dollars in startups, is that there is more than enough capital available if you have a killer idea. It's all about making sure you have a great team, a fantastic idea, you have a large total addressable market, and you are really dedicating yourself to the success of your enterprise. There are no easy answers when it comes to entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
But if indeed you're passionate about what you're doing and it is an idea that has great upside, there is more than enough capital available in India right now for any good enterprise to get funded. And like I said, I invested a lot of money myself, and the challenge was not capital. The challenge was great entrepreneurs, not even great businesses, because it's very hard from the get-go to know whether it's going to be a great business or not. What you are really looking for is great, dedicated, committed entrepreneurs that want to take risk. And sadly, I will say in India, there are too few such people. Most people in India want to take safe jobs. They want to get paid. A lot of people want to work in government or work in a public sector company. They want steady incomes. And I understand all of that. I understand. And that will be the majority. So it's not a question of whether 100% of your ISB class is going to do entrepreneurship. That's not the point. Of course, 80% of the class is not going to do it, 80 or 90%. But we need 10 to 20% people who are risk takers and who are going to be entrepreneurs. If the number is 1 or 2%, that's when we have a problem. The problem is not that most people want to take safe jobs. Of course they should. But we need to have enough people willing to take risk, because this is a great time to take risk early on in your career. Enough young people willing to take risk. That number has to be 10 or 20%, not 1 or 2%. So I don't know, Professor Chowdhry, maybe this is something you can track at ISB. But
yes, we are indeed.
How many people coming out of ISB are willing to do something entrepreneurial? India's success, India's growth, all of that, friends, is in your hands. And if 1 or 2% become entrepreneurs, we are not going to achieve the growth targets that we want, the per capita that we want. If 10 or 20% of you do it, we are going to do it. It's as simple as that, folks. So it's all in your hands. Government is there just to help you and facilitate, your dreams, your aspirations.
So let me give you a statistic on that. It is true that at graduation, the number of entrepreneurs is small, although at ISB that number is higher than other competing schools. But you'd be happy to know that when we surveyed our alumni population, people who have been out 10 plus years, over 25% who started with McKinsey's and other places are now entrepreneurs. So I think this entrepreneurial zeal has caught on to ISB, and we are encouraging it. And in fact, you just gave them an entire course in entrepreneurship with 4 bullet points. Guys, did you hear this or not? Great idea, great dream, an addressable market, and total dedication. 4 points. That's a course right there. So on that note, I want to thank you very much on behalf of all of us at ISB. And in fact, there are many others who have also joined outside the ISB. So thank you very much for coming and talking to us, and I'm going to take you up on it for doing a podcast once a month. Thank you once again.
You're very welcome, Professor Chowdhry, and thank you very much for having me. Very much enjoyed the questions and look forward to working with you on the podcast.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sinha. Thank you, Professor Chowdhry. And thank you, our audience, for being here today. Thank you so much.